Comic book and manga fans, this is H. German from Sigma Comics. I know, it's been a while. I've been incredibly busy traveling uh, and, working on the new book 3 of Here Comes Calico. I apologize, it's been a while, but today we're going to talk about Canelo versus Crawford. That's right, Saul Canelo Alvarez versus Terence Bud Crawford. As many of you know, I am not only a big boxing fan, but I used to be a boxer myself. I used to be a professional prize fighter. And even though this is a comic book and manga channel, every now and then we dip outside of comics and manga and we talk about things related to fighting and other topics. But today we're going to talk about fighting. So if you are not a comic book and manga fan and you've reached the channel and you're going to hear about, you want to hear my opinion, again, a former prize fighter, you want to hear my opinion about this fight, then settle in. Listen, you might want to subscribe, like the video, and you might get into comics because we love comics and we also love animals. We are a comic book and manga publisher dedicated to fighting animal cruelty. And I think you're going to love our character, the Calico, Hector Gill, who goes after people who abuse animals. And guess what? He's a boxer himself. So let me tell you about who we are as a company. I've already given you a synopsis and what we do. And then we're going to get into this fight, okay? So here's our website. Again, Justice for All. We fight animal abuse through comics. We have great comics, graphic novels, digitally and print. Beautiful volumes here. And our loose comics as well that you can get on our website. There's our beautiful trade, Calico Street Math, our first one. Our second one is Calico Morality Play, featuring a legendary team, the original Punisher team on the original ongoing series. Klaus Janson and Mike Barron worked on this book. And we have manga as well. So if you're a manga fan, pick up some of our manga on our website, sigmacomics.com. We have merch. Here's an I Kill for Animals shirt. And now let's get into the topic. It's Bud versus Canelo. All right. So you've probably seen about 100 of these videos pitting these guys against each other. And this one is going to be a little different, I think. Taking a swig of my Calico cup, Calico mug. I think this one's going to be a little different because I think you probably have a couple of fighters out there that have done the review, maybe a few more than a couple. But I approach this from being a former middleweight. So I actually have not only knowledge as a fighter, but also knowledge as this being my actual former weight class. Okay, I currently walk around at, between 185 and 190 pounds at 5'10", which is what these guys walk around at, frankly. And they're a little shorter than I am. I was for when I fought in the weight class, I was above average height for the weight class. And now, in the 2020s, it's probably, even maybe a little shorter. There's some guys that are taller in this weight class. But the bottom line is both of these guys are, relatively short for the weight class. Okay, and it's not that Bud is a short guy, because for his previous weight classes, he was actually a taller fighter because Bud is coming up in weight to fight Canelo. Okay, Bud has typically been a welterweight fighter who has now recently gone up in weight to contend at the middleweight division. And that's what's happening here. This is a super middleweight fight. I think they're actually fighting above the middleweight class. So this officially, I think, will go down as a super middleweight fight. And, that gets into the advantages and disadvantages. So let's start. There's so many variables that can affect the outcome of this fight. But in my opinion, there's really, 7 or 8 of them that really are the ones that we have to discuss. Because, you can get into region. Both of these fighters are on the North American continent. And obviously when you travel a great distance, or when you have to, go around the world for a fight, that's always going to leave you in a disadvantage. And a bunch of other ones like age, etc., etc. But let's talk about age, okay? Both of these fighters are unequivocally outside of their primes, okay? So let's start with Canelo. Okay, Canelo's 35, I believe. He's either 35 or 36 here. certainly outside of the prime for a boxer. Typically a prime for a boxer is somewhere, the sweet spot tends to be between 24 and 28. I think that 4 year period between 24 and 28 is the sweet spot. And of course, I'm speaking generally here because every fighter peaks at different times. If you ask me, a fighter like Mike Tyson, his peak was much earlier. Okay, so that by the time he went to fight someone like Lennox Lewis or Evander Holyfield, he was way past his prime, in my view. And frankly, I think if those two fighters, that being Lennox Lewis and Evander Holyfield, fought Mike Tyson earlier in his career, i.e., between 20 and 24 years old, personally, I think they would have been smoked. In fact, I don't even think the fights would have been competitive. Okay, that's my view. And again, this speaks to the prime of these fighters. Okay. Conversely, Bud Crawford is the older fighter here. He's 37 years old. Okay. So again, both the fighters are out of their primes. They're both active, but they're coming into this fight well past their primes. Okay. Who do I give the advantage here? I mean, you have to give it to Canelo because he's younger. He's 2 years younger, in fact. Okay, and he's not the kind of fighter that fights with enormous amount of velocity. Okay, typically fighters who use a lot of speed, like a Mike Tyson, okay, use power, strength and speed, which is power. Okay, they hit the prime earlier. Canelo is not a fighter who's ever used enormous amounts of velocity to do his thing. Yes, power is important in his game, but he's carrying his power well later into the years. Okay, and same thing with Bud Crawford. Although I think Crawford uses a bit more speed and ring generalship in his fighting. So just on paper, you'd have to give it to Canelo here because he is a couple of years younger, and both of them are pretty well-worn fighters. They've been in some pretty intense battles. You could argue that Canelo has been in the more intense battles, and that's due to the level of competition. But we'll get into that in a moment because that is also, in my view, a very important variable. So next here on this list is how did they do in their last fight? Okay. Canelo, I think both of them fought, if I'm not mistaken. No. I was going to say they both fought similar type fighters, but they didn't. Canelo fought a fighter who is tall and lanky. His name escapes me at the moment, but the competitor was almost 6 feet tall, which again is closer to what you see now with middleweights. Okay, this guy was 5'11", 5'11 and a half. Okay, if I'm not mistaken, Canelo did fairly well with him, but it wasn't easy street. He had some difficulty. Okay, and not only was this guy taller, significantly taller, but he also had very good movement, excellent side-to-side movement. And I'm not going to say it flustered Canelo, but as I mentioned, it was an easy street. And to qualify that, the fight was very close. It was a 1 point or 2 point fight. Okay, this was not, even though I believe it was a unanimous decision, it was only by 1 or 2 points, all right, across the judges. So, again, not an easy fight here for Canelo in his last fight. And who did he face? He faced a tall fighter who had really good movement. How about Bud? Well, Bud faced an Eastern European fighter that gave him some difficulty as well, and even marked up his face a bit, which you don't typically see from Bud. This fighter was around his same height. He was a tough, rugged opponent with a very good chin. And listen, Bud tagged him pretty good a few times there, and the fighter held his ground. And again, just like with Canelo, this was not easy street. This was also a fight that went by 1 or 2 points in Bud's favor, but again, very close. So this is going to be a pretty tough one here, but I think I'm going to go with Bud just because he did tag the other fighter rather convincingly, and it was clear from the Canelo fight, his last fight, that there were some challenges there. He had some problems cutting the ring off a bit, and not necessarily cutting it off, but cutting it off effectively with combinations, which you typically see from Canelo. Canelo typically isn't a one-punch fighter. He's typically, putting together 2, 3 punch combinations, and coupled with a good chin and some good pop behind those punches, he wins his fights convincingly. Well, that wasn't the case in this last fight for Canelo. You just oppose that with Bud. Bud is really good at the one-shot punches, and frankly, a lot of times he does win rounds because his one-punch shots are very clear and have a pretty big impact on the opponent, to the point where, paired with his defense, an excellent ring generalship. See, it's not just the defense; it's defense with ring generalship, and those one pot shot punches. He'll win the round and convince the judge that, hey, this guy is the winner. He's winning this fight, and that factors in greatly. So I really think, with respect to the last fight, I think we're going to go with Bud here on this one. Moving on to ring generalship. I brought this term up a couple of times, and I think this one is fairly easy. I think Bud Crawford is the better fighter with respect to ring generalship. What is ring generalship? It's not a term that's used very often these days. It used to be used very often back in the day. But it simply means who is the fighter who assumes better command in the ring. Folks, fighting is a war. Okay, you're standing your ground, you're marking your territories. Okay, you're moving around. Who moves better with the better style equipment that convincingly displays an air of prominence in the fight? Who is dictating the pace? Okay, who is developing the better angles and captivating the moment in those angles, right? I think that Canelo has excellent defense. Excellent defense, certainly above the waist. He doesn't really move that much in terms of his footwork. He's not really flashy with his footwork, that being Canelo. Canelo is more of a pressure fighter with excellent waist to head movement. This guy really moves his head very well. He has very good defense, both with his arms and his head. And with the power that he has, he usually does a very good job. With respect to Bud does the similar things, although he has a bit better footwork and develops better angles. Okay, and I think he also parries a little better than does Canelo, but slightly. However, the entire package of movement with defense and command of the ring, I really do think that Crawford does a better job here. And that's why I say it's easy, because he combines more things to get that ring generalship nod. So we're going to give that to Bud. Power. Now, typically, right off the bat, you'd say, well, that's Canelo. Okay, this guy has some pop to him. Until you look at this. This is the tail of the tape for this fight. And you're going to look at the KOs here. I mean, that's pretty significant. Okay, the KO to win ratio on Crawford is dramatically higher than it is for Canelo. Okay, that's well, I wouldn't say dramatically higher, but it's notably higher there. Obviously, Alvarez has had more fights, so that's going to play into effect. But hey, that's a pretty big KO percentage there. And you could say, well, Crawford, over the course of his career, has fought lighter weight fighters, so that's why you get there. Well, sure, that could be fair too. But Alvarez also fought smaller fighters as well. So, let's not forget that, some of the losses actually that Alvarez has had have been to smaller fighters. Look at his fight against Floyd Mayweather. I mean, Floyd Mayweather made Canelo look amateurish in certain parts of that fight, in actually significant parts of that fight. All right, and again, a smaller fighter at a smaller weight class. Now you could say, sure, uh, Canelo wasn't in his prime then; he was still coming up. Yeah, you could say that, but I mean, there really isn't much validity to it because, uh, this is already a fighter who is, a good weight, a good size for the division. He wasn't, 20, 21 years old when he was fighting Mayweather. Of course, he was fighting Mayweather now, a more experienced fighter, certainly way more experienced at that particular time than Alvarez was. But it was a very decisive win for Mayweather. And, if we're talking about power, did Canelo catch, Mayweather in any meaningful way? I don't think so. I saw the fight, and I don't think so. Canelo has certainly caught a lot of fighters and put them on the ground, permanently and knocked them out. But if you look at the record of Crawford, he's fought some really good fighters too, and look at that record. But, again, now we're getting into opposition territory, and that's another important variable. So let's keep that discussion into that variable when it comes up. So the power is going to be close, but I think ultimately Bud gets it just on the KO to win ratio. Moving on to Chin, this is another close one. If you look at the fighters' track record here, neither of them have been officially knocked down, which is very impressive. For Canelo, he fought, I believe it was an Eastern European fighter who hit him with a body shot. And it was ruled a slip, even though, most viewers would contend that this was a knockdown. Canelo weathered the fall well and went on to defeat the opponent. But that question still remains, right? But typically, a poor chin is not something that is equated with Canelo, and nor does he get rocked often. And the same goes to Bud Crawford. This is not somebody who gets hit, uh, uh, flush and gets rocked. He can be hit flush just like Canelo can. But Bud has a pretty good beard, and he takes those shots pretty well. And it's very impressive. Again, he's put together an undefeated record there. And you got somebody who's never been knocked down, who's never been knocked out, and he's undefeated. Well, it turns out that Bud, in fact, has been on the canvas, just not officially. Again, he's another one who's been, uh, you know, on the canvas, but he hasn't been officially knocked down. This was a fight that he had with a gentleman who hit him up pretty good, and the fighter went down, but it was ruled a slip, even though it was clear that Crawford was actually kind of wobbly there on his feet. So, who got hit with the better punch? Probably Crawford. And certainly who reacted the most poorly, it was, again, Crawford. You still give it to, well, I don't want to say you give it to Crawford just because of the record, but, you've seen Canelo lose a couple of fights here. And what does that speak to? What causes a fighter to lose a fight who's never been knocked down? Well, typically, again, this is the benefit of speaking as a fighter. When you have been hit with some really good shots, what happens is you become a bit more deliberate. And what does that cause? It causes you to become more hesitant, punch less, and guess what happens? That aids in your loss. And that's what's happened to Canelo. He's lost twice. Okay? Don't think that Floyd Mayweather didn't hit Canelo with some shots that had him thinking. And guess what? He lost that fight. Okay? He just lost another fight against a bigger opponent, another Eastern European opponent there. I forget his name with a B. Bevelev or something like that. Bevelev, I don't know. Something like that. That being Canelo, who just recently lost. Now he went up for that fight, so obviously that didn't work out for him, going up in weight class. This fellow was quite a bit bigger and heavier than Canelo, and beat him, and also hit him with some pretty good shots. So you want to talk about a chin here. You want to talk about who's going to take the punch better. It's very close for both of these guys. I think that I think I'd still give it to Crawford just because he's taken those shots and gone on to win, as opposed to Canelo. Okay, so we're looking at Crawford here ahead here in the comparison. Now we're going to move on to competition. The opposition. Who's had the better opposition? In this case, I don't think it's close. I think Canelo has certainly had the better opposition. Both fighters have, fought pretty good fighters, but I just think Canelo, I think it's clear, Canelo has fought the much better opposition. You're talking about, in some cases, legendary fighters that are going to eventually go on to the Hall of Fame. That Canelo, in some cases, not only fought, but beat. You got fighters like Miguel Cotto in there, all right? You got fighters like Mayweather, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of other fighters that Canelo has beaten. Or in some cases, just fought. But listen, that's pretty damn good competition, which Crawford has not seen. Okay, so this one's easy. Canelo. Opposition, Canelo. He takes it. Okay, let's look at how about the ring. This is a very important variable that, again, these days people don't really talk about this one. But this is going to be an 18 by 18 foot ring. That one is definitely going to benefit Canelo. Okay, because typically, anything under, 18 and under is typically a smallish ring. Okay, and it's going to benefit the fighter that has typically the fighter who doesn't move as well, who has pretty good power, and certainly that is going to be Canelo, in my opinion, in this fight. Canelo's going to have good pop, good defense, but Crawford has better movement, better foot movement, because Canelo has, good, obviously, waist to head movement. But in terms of getting around the ring, moving around the ring, and ring generalship and stewardship, I definitely think that's going to be Crawford here. But if you give him a smaller ring, then you diminish that. Okay? It's a smaller ring, advantage Canelo. And finally, I think the last one that's of any significant merit is the weight. Okay, the weight here. This is going to benefit Canelo. Canelo is the naturally bigger fighter, even though he's the shorter opponent by an inch. But what does that mean? And why am I giving it to Canelo? Well, understand the following. Crawford is used to fighting with 8-ounce gloves. 8-ounce gloves. Remember, folks, once you get above the welterweight division, you have to move up to those 10-ounce gloves. So Crawford has been fighting with, or fought with, 10-ounce gloves in his last fight. Did he look good? Not really. Again, he barely won that fight. I mean, he only won by 1 or 2 points. All right, so, can you say he looked good? I mean, maybe you can. Can you say he looked very good? Absolutely not. Can you say he looked great? I mean, why are we even talking? No, this is going to be advantage Canelo here. All right, this is somebody who has comfortably fought with the 10-ounce gloves for, a good while now. Okay, and granted, he came up at a lower weight division just like Crawford. But it's Canelo who has, fought at a higher weight division for a longer time and more comfortably. So this is going to be advantage Canelo. You take in all of these factors and, you add them up. It's pretty close. It's pretty close, but I think Bud comes out with it. Again, this is weighing what I believe to be the important variables. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, there are many more variables, but I think that these are going to be the key ones for the fight, and Bud comes out ahead. looking at this. Folks, that's my view of the fight. I think Bud takes this one. It is available if you are not a boxing fan or a fight fan and you want to just give this a shot and you're a comic book person who's been listening to the video and say, hey, let's see what HH is talking about here and watch this fight. It's going to be on Netflix this weekend. It's going to be Saturday night on Netflix. So go to Netflix, look at your listing there on Netflix, and see when the fight's going to be. I think you need to go to the sports section, or maybe it's going to be right there as soon as you log into Netflix. But certainly Saturday, you should be able to see that fight on Netflix. And I hope you enjoy it. If you're a fight fan and you enjoyed listening to my perspective as a former fighter, I ask you to like the video, hit subscribe if you like fighting, because I talk about other fights as well, and also comics and manga if you want to get into that. We'd love for you to get into our comic book, Here Comes Calico. And if you're not a fight fan, check it out. I think you might like it. And make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. And as always, keep on fighting for animals.